you all hear me?
Yep.
It's terrible, this fear that you're not being heard. I know I'm being heard. I know I'm being seen, but I still feel, so I need to clarify. Well, thank you, Steph. That was really, really lovely talk. It's a fantastic talk. I really enjoyed it. And I really loved it in particular. You talking about the aversions, you know, the aversion you get to play, but then the benefits you experience afterwards, about benefits of joy and patience emerging, humility, and that all resonates with me. It really does. And you talked about I think picking up a stick or playing with a stick. And I seem to spend all of my childhood in search of the stick, the perfect stick to play with. Yes, so I was wondering if I could find enough to say about play today. And of course, there's so much to say about play and play in the Dharma life that, of course, I'm just kind of scratching the surface. I'm going to start with a short verse from the Dhammapada. I just came across this and thought, oh, I know, I'm going to build my talk on this, but I haven't really done that. But anyway, victory begets hatred, for the defeated one experiences suffering. The tranquil one experiences happiness, giving up both victory and defeat. So that's victory begets hatred, for the defeated one experiences suffering. The tranquil one experiences happiness, giving up both victory and defeat. I noticed that, that often in my life, I think sometimes in my life I've confused playfulness with competitiveness. As a kid, when I was a kid, when we started to play competitive sport in junior school, the playfulness of sports, it started to disappear, it started to go, and I didn't notice it really then at the time, at about aged 8. But I didn't mind it. In fact, I loved it. I loved being competitive in sports, although I didn't really enjoy being competitive in other parts of life. And as we got older, a good friend of mine got into a lot of trouble when he started playing fruit machines. And in recent years, gambling companies, they've started to call their industry gaming instead of betting or gambling. And of course, a lot of gambling isn't even competitive. You have fixed odds, and outside of sport, you have fixed outcomes. Although perhaps inside a lot of sport, you have fixed outcomes too. But when I was a boy in the mid 70s, so from the age of about 8 until I was about 11, I had a friend called Richard who lived in the flats at the end of our estate in Cricklewood, northwest London, and he had quite a few board games. Richard had a few board games, and we spent about 3 or 4 years playing these games in his bedroom, and it was about the happiest time of my life, of my childhood. Then I absolutely loved it, and I loved a game called Risk in particular. You might have heard of Risk. I don't know. It's a board game, and I loved the board. I loved the little pieces, and I loved that the board represented the continents of the earth. And I loved that someone won the game as well. And for the 3 years that I played Risk with Richard, I never had the faintest idea of what the rules were, what I was supposed to be doing. Didn't have a clue what the rules were, but I think he knew, and I think maybe he liked the idea that he always won. But I just loved the idea of being stimulated by this idea of a representation of Earth and seeing the continents. So he always won. So I didn't have a happy childhood, and I definitely wasn't a tranquil boy. I had a very violent childhood. But for the couple of hours in Richard's room playing Risk with him, I lost myself in the continents of the Earth. And so I never imagined what the rules were, but I definitely did imagine. So I was definitely imagining while I was doing that with him. And in my imagination, I was tranquil. I was a tranquil boy. And I don't mean tranquilized, I just mean free from worry. So during those times of play, I was just free from worry. And looking back at that time, I definitely experienced happiness. So in play, kind of unstructured play, I was very happy. And then when I was 41, I became a stepfather to a fantastic 11-year-old boy. Some of you know him. You know him now as a man. In fact, some of you might even have known him as a boy, because he was around the Buddhist Center from as a toddler, really. And he's 26 now. And but I became his stepdad when I was 41, and he was about 11. And so for me, our relationship over the last 15 years it's been very challenging and it's been very rewarding. I think I could say the same for him too. But we didn't play much when he was a kid, you know. So when I met him, 11, 12, we didn't play much. But I spent the first few years trying not to make any mistakes as a dad, you know, and trying not to give myself a hard time. And I wasn't fathered, so I was over anxious that I wasn't fathering James properly. So we didn't play that much, you know, as kids. But I did get him involved in sport. And when he was 14, we started running together. So Steph mentioned running as play, and I really, it resonates with me too. So running became the play that me and James did the most. And again, it changed from a more playful play into a very, very competitive play. What it did for me anyway. So we usually ran sort of 5 or 6 miles in them at a time. And at some point during the run, so at some point during the play, after about a mile or 2 or 3, it became competitive. So it would change during the play. And it was unspoken. We didn't say anything, but we kind of look at each other or get a sense that one of us was kind of, you know. And James usually won those. But one time in particular, we went to Walthamstow track and we did a timed 1,500 metre run. So that's 3 3/4 times around the track. And he led all the way. And in the last 100 metres, I'm so happy. Look, in the last 100 metres, I sprinted past him and I won that time. So he was the defeated one. And he most definitely experienced suffering. So he was only 14. He experienced suffering at that point, at the end of that race, and I could see it. And I could afford to be mature about it, and I could afford to congratulate him on the race anyway, and say that either of us could have won, and it didn't matter. But inside, I was absolutely made up. And in fact, I still tell my wife from time to time that story. She doesn't like how pleased I am when I'm telling the story. But that victory, it did beget, it did beget a kind of hatred in me. And it certainly wasn't a malicious hatred towards James, but it definitely wasn't a generous feeling either. I think because I was in my mid-40s and he was a fit teenager, I was hubristic. And I still, when I think of that story and that sort of transition from play to competitiveness, I still feel hubris around it. And so I don't look back on James's childhood now with a regret that we didn't play together more. You know, he had his friends, he had a lot of friends, and he had all the FIFA thing. It was always on the FIFA thing going on. But I have a good friend now who's a single mum, and I'm close with her 4-year-old boy, Alfie. We're very, very close. And some of you know Alfie from the parent Dharma class last year or the year before, I'm not sure. So with Alfie, I notice sometimes that there's some sort of fear in me of playing with him. So I still carry some of this urge to do the right thing and stay in control when I'm playing with Alfie. And of course, what we do when we enter, you know, when we do allow ourselves to play with children, is that we let go of ourselves. So I let go. Sometimes my imagination takes over, and there's risk involved there for me. So I think I'm letting go of control. So that desire for control, or that reluctance to get on the floor and play with Alfie, it's kind of a laziness, kind of an entropy that's actually quite painful. So while I'm sitting there and I'm noticing that I'm not getting on the floor with him and I'm not being spontaneous, it is painful. So there's dukkha there, definitely. And a sort of a lazy aversion to playing. So Steph was talking about an aversion, sort of kind of aversion to playing, or a craving for not playing, a craving for the sofa. So there's the cause of dukkha. So you've got the noble truths right there in that moment when I do or do not play with Alfie from the sofa. So one thing I noticed that happens when I do manage to let myself go and play with Alfie is that I forget myself and my imagination does run free, it runs free. And the same thing happens when I write fiction, or I manage to immerse myself in a story, or when I make time to read fiction. Or for many people, you know, if they appreciate art, or if they immerse themselves in nature, I think a similar thing happens. And I think there's a very close relationship here between our experience of encountering beauty and our experience in play. I mean, it seems that we can't really experience beauty, or I can't really experience play if I'm approaching it with laziness, with that kind of entropy. So I need to bring the right intention, I need to bring the right intention, you know, towards play. I need to bring that right energy in. I think I should have looked more at this relationship between beauty and play, but never mind. So what we're doing when we play is we're taking a risk. We're putting down our fears, and that involves putting down, it involves risk like putting down anything. So you put the booze down, you put the fags down, gambling or guilt. You know, there is a risk involved because you don't know what's going to emerge. And so, but what we're doing, we're allowing space for something created to emerge. And by definition, I think that's something that's probably beyond our cognitive control. And through play, we can get into the habit of taking risks with our next steps. And I noticed this with Alfie. And I don't mean reckless risks, but creative risks. So to book a retreat, to book a 2-week retreat instead of 2 weeks in Ibiza is a creative risk. To spend a day in an art gallery, you know, rather than a day, you know, on a building site or writing advertising copy is a creative risk. And I think 2 weeks in Ibiza is far more predictable than a 2-week retreat. I think the rewards of taking these risks are a more open-hearted response to life, to the challenges of life. And so for me, to get on the floor with Alfie and mess around with a train set for an hour is a creative risk. There's no career or economic or political benefit to that. It's just to immerse myself into Alfie's world. It's to dive into that realm, that kind of love realm. And it's to be vulnerable as well. You know, if I'm playing with Alfie, then I play on his terms. And those terms generally are that there are no terms. So to be vulnerable in that sense is to be invulnerable, really, because I've got nothing to lose when I play with Alfie. There's nothing really to lose, you know. And I think when we finish playing, so I noticed this as well, I think when we finish playing, I noticed that I've forgotten myself for the time that we were playing. I think that's the flow we hear about in the Dharma. You know, in Dharma talks, we hear about flow, and it's usually referred to, you know, in terms of, we're talking about matter and energy. But I think it's that when you're in that creative process and you don't know you're in it until you're not in it, and then you realise that you were in it. I think that's flow. So I've just got a few more minutes left. So have I got a few minutes left? Just a couple of minutes. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's fine.
Oh, thank you. Okay, and so yes, so playing isn't a lot of the things that I do. So playing isn't planning. It's not ruminating. I think the spiritual dimension of play is it's just very clear. I think it's that we're it's really about living in the moment. You know, it's about being unsure of what the next moment will bring, but learning to embrace what the next moment will bring by noticing the joy in the current moment. So it's really the mindfulness of play. So it might seem that play is unmindful because, as I said, there's a kind of creative recklessness involved. But because play manifests in us surrendering control, and so surrendering to the moment, we're able to be in that moment. So it really is mindful. I think the more I think about that, I think the more I'd love to live my life that way. And I think finally, so Steph mentioned the Bodhisattva, and I'm going to mention it as well. So if I mentioned the Bodhisattva earlier, and Steph did also, so the Bodhisattva goes about the business of the alleviation of the suffering of all beings in a playful, even a light-hearted way. Sangharakshita, I don't know where he refers to this, I saw it somewhere, but he refers to it as serious playfulness. It's a serious playfulness. So it's a serious business, you know. So this alleviation of the suffering of all beings as play is a serious business, but as if it were play. And I think it's really good for me to remember that I don't always turn towards play. That when I turn towards play, I'm not burying my head in the sand. I'm not ignoring my responsibilities. You know, as an adult, you know, we're entitled to play. At the same time, when I'm sat on the sofa and Alfie's on the floor playing on his own, and I am inspired to join him, lose myself in the joy of it all, I think that moment of inspiration will pass also. You know, that lovely creative hour will go, it will pass. So I think finally, if my responsibilities, if my so-called responsibilities, my work and my Zoom, you know, my Zoom meeting, even my family commitments, and even some of the things that I love to do for pleasure, I think if these things are distracting me from developing my mind, from becoming a kinder, more compassionate parent, well, not just parent, person, you know, more responsive man, which they do, then I surely need to play more and more with Alfie, and I think less of my responsibilities. And there we are. Thank you.